Okay, the final little video that I'm going to go through is using the precipitate solubility rules, or the solubility rules, to work out whether you would have formed a precipitate or not. So these solubility rules are on your precipitate prac sheet, okay, but they're also in your textbook on page 190, just up here. Now we did discover in class that there's no mention of copper in here, so don't stress about that, just move on and do all the ones that you can. So what you need to do is check that you have correctly, or you've done your practical correctly. So if you got a precipitate reaction, if you formed a precipitate, you need to work out which of your two new chemicals formed that precipitate. Okay, if you didn't, obviously you'll be writing aqueous, a little AQ next to everything. Also remember we had two solutions in the lab that we were starting with that actually were insoluble. So there were two cloudy ones, and that was, I think it was calcium carbonate and barium sulfate from memory. I just don't have my prac sheet here. I'm just going to quickly bring that up. Prac sheet. So prac. All right. Okay, so we're going to do this equation, the one that we've been working on. So what you would do after you've written it out in a balanced format, so I'm just going to rewrite it out again. Okay, and then I'm going to put the states. Now, for this prac, for precipitate reactions, you're either going to have an AQ, which means it's an aqueous solution, i.e. the ionic compound has been dissolved in water, or the solute's been dissolved in water, that's what an aqueous solution is. Or you're going to have an S, which means it's a solid. So that would indicate that that particular compound was not soluble in water and therefore formed a precipitate. So if we go to the prac sheet, you'll see that we had our list of ionic compounds that were in solution. So it was the calcium carbonate and the barium sulfate, which were insoluble. So they were, we could see a solid in those, and we had to sort of swirl them up before we used them. There are the solubility rules. There's the simplified valency table, and this was your table that you were recording all of your results on. And that was your line space for you to do these things. So what you're going to do is use your solubility rules to work out what the little subscript will be on each of your four chemicals. Again, you may have your results in the prac, but obviously if you produced a precipitate with this reaction, you've got two potential precipitate producing compounds. So you need to check which one produced the precipitate. So we can use our solubility rules. So we've got a compound that is sodium sulfate. So all compounds containing either the sodium ion will dissolve in water. Compounds containing these ions never form precipitates. So we know straight away that sodium sulfate will be aqueous because of the presence of the sodium ions. We also know that sodium chloride, which is salt, like table salt, also does not form precipitate. So we can write an AQ right there. Then we need to look at our other one. So we've got a calcium chloride. So compounds containing the chloride ion are soluble except when they contain silver, lead, or mercury. Okay, so we've got a calcium chloride compound, and so it's not any of those exceptions. So we know that that would also be aqueous. Now I actually, just thinking, I don't think we use these ones in the prac. Let me have a look. We did not use calcium chloride, and we did not use sodium sulfate. So that's terrific. Doesn't matter. So you'll just be using those chemicals in this equation. So where I've got these two, you'll have different ones, and you'll go through the same process. Then we need to look at our calcium sulfate. So we're looking for a sulfate. So rule 3, compounds containing the sulfate ion are soluble except for barium, lead and calcium sulfate. So calcium sulfate will form a precipitate. So in our equation we would write a little S to indicate that that would actually form a precipitate. So if we were using these two chemicals, these two ionic compounds in solution, and we mix them together, we would get a precipitate forming. So there would be a solid evident in our test tube. And that's the final stage of completing this precipitate prac. I hope that's helped.